Hi, fantasy readers. This is Karyne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. Today, you get to hear the final installment of Tara Grayce's Beauty and the Beast retelling. So if you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes, go do that first. Tara writes humorous, highly adventurous, and no-spice fantasy romance, and she has over 30 books now, so after you're done listening to today's episode, you'll want to go check out what else she has to offer. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from Tara, as well as how to enter our giveaway. For now, please enjoy Torn Curtains, Part 3 by Tara Grayce. Chapter 10. On How I Return Home. One morning, shortly after our ride in Hyde Park, I received a letter from my sister. "Rose, please come quickly. Father's health is fading. He may not live out the week." I dashed into Lord Warnwick's study, barely stopping for a polite knock at the door. "My lord, I received this correspondence. With your permission, I wish to return home immediately." Lord Warnwick took the letter from me and read it quickly. "Of course. I'll have a coach take you to Portsmouth. Will you be ready to leave in an hour?" "Yes." I wouldn't need to take my new dresses and frills. Not when I was abandoning Lord Warnwick, when the vote was so near and our campaign nearly fulfilled. But I had to go home to see to father. I couldn't abandon my family. I threw a few things into a carpet bag. I wouldn't even bother taking a trunk. I had come to Lord Warnwick's house with nothing but a curtain dress. I would leave with little more than that. I wore the least fancy of the dresses he'd bought me and packed the curtain dress as a spare. As I was finishing up, Mary came inside, followed by 2 of the footmen carrying a trunk. "Lord Warnwick said for us to help you pack." I held up the carpet bag. "I'm all set. All the rest of the dresses and such are his." Mary smiled. "Lord Warnwick said you'd say that. He said there's no point him keeping any of it. It's yours." I could only gape as Mary carefully piled the dresses and fancy things Lord Warnwick had bought for me. I couldn't believe his generosity. He shouldn't give me so much. If I had been less worried for father, I might have protested, but the pressure in my chest kept my mouth shut as the footman loaded the trunk on the coach. The shaggy Welsh unicorn was tied onto the back. Another gift? I should have refused. It was too much. But I couldn't. Not then. My father could be dying. My young sisters were all alone, facing this without me to comfort them. I had to get back to Portsmouth as quickly as possible. Protesting the gifts would only delay things. I could always quietly return them to Downshead Hall when I had the chance. Lord Warnwick stepped outside to see me off. "If you ever need anything, please come to Downshead and ask. There will always be a place for you there if you want it." The way he said it, I wasn't sure what he was trying to imply. Was he saying there would always be a place as a servant? Or something more? But I couldn't take the time to question it. I could only nod and let him shut the coach door and signal the driver. Then I was on my way to Portsmouth. About an hour into the ride, after I'd cried a few tears and reread the note 1,000 times, I had to distract myself somehow. I searched through my carpet bag and reticule for a piece of paper and pen and ink so I could post a letter to my sister to let them know I was on the way. I didn't find any of those things, but I did find the magic book on transformations. Another thing I would have to return to Lord Warnwick as soon as I got the chance. I'm sure he hadn't meant for me to take the book with me when he said I could borrow it. Still, it would provide a welcome distraction. I cracked it open at my bookmark. I had hours yet to Portsmouth. I might as well use the time wisely. If I didn't, I would just keep thinking about father and his health. The passage I was reading was particularly dense, and I had to reread the passage several times before I understood it. It seemed somehow important, especially for something as difficult as transformations. If one had to recreate the conditions of the original spell casting, then what sort of conditions had been present when Lord Warnwick's spell was cast? Something was beyond the usual with his enchantment for it to have remained so unbreakable all these months. I forced myself to ponder this on the rest of our drive. Something niggled at me with this. I wasn't sure what. If I could figure out how to break Lord Warnwick's curse, it would go a long way toward repaying the great debt I owed him. Chapter 11. On How We Were Tricked. I arrived home hours later, sore, tired, and more worried than I had ever been in my life. My stomach was tied into a knot tighter than Lord Warnwick's cravat, and my limbs were useless after sitting so long. But I piled out of the coach late in the evening and dashed to the door. Mary Ann dashed down the front step to meet me. "Rosie, how did you get here so quickly?" "Lord Warnwick helped. I came as soon as I could. Where's father? How is he?" I gripped her shoulders. Had he passed even before I could arrive? Mary Ann stepped back and stared. "I don't know." "Wait, you don't know? How could you not know? Did the physician take him away to a hospital or something?" I couldn't wrap my befuddled and sleep-deprived mind around her words. How could she not know where father was? "They took him 2 days ago." Mary Ann sniffed and scrubbed at her face. "She forced me to write to you." What was going on? I tightened my grip on Mary Ann's shoulders. "Who took him? What is going on?" "I don't know." Mary Ann was sniffing harder now. If I kept pressing, she would burst into tears, and I would never get answers out of her. I steered her toward the house. "Let's sit down, and you can tell me everything." I led her inside, ignoring the sailors as they carried in my trunk and took care of the coach. Emma rushed down the stairs and hugged me. "I'm so glad you're here, Rosie. I was so scared." I herded both of them into the parlor and took a seat. "What is going on? What happened?" Mary Ann sniffed. 2 days ago, a man and a woman came to the house. They said they had news about you. Then the man took father, persuaded him to get into the coach, while that lady told me to write that note. She said that if I didn't, then she would spread scandalous gossip about you and Lord Warnwick, and it would ruin you and us and Lord Warnwick, and I couldn't let that happen. So I wrote it." A man and a woman. The only ones I could think of were Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle. I had no proof, none at all, but my instincts were telling me they were behind this, behind everything. For what purpose, I didn't yet know, but I would find out. Why had they kidnapped father? Why drag me back here? Why now? The vote. It was coming up. This was a cutting-out boarding, meant to take Lord Warnwick by surprise and sink him. He had to be warned. Now. There was no time to take a coach back. I gripped Mary Ann's shoulders. "I think I know who did this. I'm going to need the two of you to be brave for a little longer. I'm going to get father back, all right?" Mary Ann swiped at her nose and nodded. I whirled out the door and shouted to the sailors, "Saddle my unicorn!" While they saddled the small Welsh unicorn, I changed into my riding dress. By the time I flew down the stairs, he was ready. I clambered onto his back, settled into the side saddle, and urged him into a canter without looking back. It was foolhardy. A young lady, alone, traveling from Portsmouth to London by horseback. It wasn't done. If anyone found out what I had done, my reputation would be beyond tattered. But I had to warn Lord Warnwick, and I had to get there as quickly as possible. Nothing could gallop as fast as a unicorn. As soon as we were clear of Portsmouth, I urged him into a gallop. He flew down the road, not exactly graceful, more like riding something built of pure, surging muscles. It was all I could do to hang on as best I could, slipping and bouncing as I was in the side saddle, and breathe. It didn't matter. I just had to get to London and warn Lord Warnwick before it was too late. We charged down the road at a full run. The unicorn seemed to sense my urgency. Perhaps it was a unicorn thing. It was hours and nearly 100 miles between Portsmouth and London. I wasn't sure the unicorn had the stamina to make it. I wasn't sure I would make it. But I had to try. Lord Warnwick's life might depend on it. Chapter 12. On how I attempt to foil a scheme. London came into view by evening the next day. The unicorn was gamely staggering on, having refused to let me leave him behind the one time I stopped for a few hours. I was so sore and tired, I could have gratefully collapsed onto the dirt and never gotten back up. But somewhere in London, Lord Warnwick was in trouble. Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle had nearly 3 days since I'd left to work their scheme. They would have needed most of that time to travel back from Portsmouth, since I doubted they had moved with the haste I had, being in a coach and with my father along. But once they were in London, they would move quickly. They couldn't be sure what I would do when I found my father kidnapped. They would probably assume I would contact the authorities, who would launch a local investigation. It might take a few days before word reached London about the investigation. Whatever they were planning, they would do it before then. I rode straight to Lord Warnwick's house. I didn't care if any of the gentry saw me. I didn't care if the gossips shredded my reputation the next morning. All that mattered was getting to Lord Warnwick to warn him before Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle put their plan into action. At the front step, I slid off the unicorn and nearly collapsed. The unicorn bent down, letting me use its horn to pull myself back to my feet. I staggered to the door just as Mr. Fenton flung it open.
"Miss Clampton, what are you doing here?"
"There's no time to explain. Where is Lord Warnwick?" Mr. Fenton frowned.
"He isn't here. He received a missive earlier in the evening, and left in quite a hurry afterwards."
"Where did he go? Do you know?" I gripped the unicorn's reins. I had to find him.
"He didn't tell me."
Mr. Fenton's frown deepened. I pushed past him into the house and headed for the study. Would Lord Warnwick have left that missive behind when he exited in a hurry? I burst into the study and swept a glance over the desk. Everything in place, except for one scrap of paper tossed carelessly on top. I picked it up and read quickly. "Lord Warnwick, we have Mr. George Clampton in our custody. Meet us at Hyde Park at 9 o'clock to discuss his safe return. You wouldn't want anything to happen to him or his beautiful 3 daughters. 9. That was only a few minutes from now. I raced back out the house, nearly bowling over Mr. Fenton as I dashed past him. "Call the constable. Read the note." Hopefully, Mr. Fenton understood. I didn't have time to explain further. I clambered back onto the unicorn and kicked him into a canter, racing down the streets to Hyde Park. Where in Hyde Park would they be? I tried to picture a layout of the park in my mind from the few rides I'd gone on inside of it. Would they be by the Serpentine? Or was there some hidden garden that would be more private? I pointed the unicorn toward Hyde Park Corner. I probably caused a great scandal galloping through the streets at this time of night, but I didn't care. We flew past the entrance to Hyde Park, and I reined the unicorn in. Where would they be? Just inside the park, off to the side past the rows of trees, was a small rose garden. It was secluded. It would be the place to start. I left the unicorn at the edge of the trees, picked up my skirts, and headed for the garden. As I approached, I heard voices.
Now, Lord Warnwick, don't try to struggle. You of all people should know the strength of 2 magiologists working in tandem, especially when there is a bond between them that is more than simply a professional working acquaintance."
Mr. Doyle's voice carried through the tangles of roses and thorns.
"My sister and I have been working spells together since we were young. You cannot break that spell."
I crept closer, breathing lightly and treading carefully. I peeked around the edge of the hedge and spotted Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle standing by an ornate white marble fountain. A few yards in front of them, Lord Warnwick strained against iron bands clamped around his wrists and seemingly anchored to the ground. Now that I was concentrating, I could feel the hum of magic, vibrating and growing stronger. Both Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle were magiologists. I could sense that now, sense how their 2 vibrations were working together to build the spell. That's how they must have cast the spell on Lord Warnwick in the first place, the one that had turned him into a beast. It took the 2 of them. I remembered that passage I'd read in the Book of Transformations. To break a spell, one had to recreate the circumstances of the original casting. That's where the genius of this spell casting came in. Lady Wilson was a magiologist, yet women magiologists were rare. The magiologists at Oxford and in the academy were all men. They could never break this particular spell. They needed a woman trained in magic. They needed me. I took a deep breath. Even now, the spell holding Lord Warnwick was a complicated one. He couldn't fight it off by himself, not when the original spell was once again cast by two magiologists. We would have to fight it off together. But how were we going to do that? I wasn't nearly as progressed in my training as Lady Wilson clearly was. Would I be able to help Lord Warnwick cast off this spell? Or would I kill both of us in the attempt? Lady Wilson smiled and twitched her fingers. Father stepped forward, a gun in his hand. His eyes were cloudy, confused, and his movements jerky and hesitant. When I concentrated, I could feel the vibrations of magic surrounding him, too, though his spell was only being worked by Lady Wilson, not the two of them together. Lord Warnwick grunted and thrashed against the chains holding him down. "Ah, yes, my lord. You recognize Mr. George Clampton, don't you? You see, you gave us the perfect setup for killing you when you took that Clampton twit into your home." Lady Wilson's smile grew slick and oily as Lord Warnwick growled. "Of course, I found out about that. Lady Ethelwyle finally realized where she had seen the girl you'd danced with at her ball before, and she let it slip to me. She remembered seeing the girl as a servant in your household. It took a little digging, but we finally tracked down her family. What a poor, addled father she has, doesn't she? Too addled to be able to resist control, the way a normal person can."
"Let him go. The Clamptons have nothing to do with this."
Lord Warnwick stopped struggling. I could feel him try to push away the spell holding the chains in place, but as he was fighting a spell created by two, he couldn't do it by himself. "No, they don't. But we can't have you forming an attachment with the girl. Not when she vibrates with magic." Lady Wilson shook her head and made a tisking noise in the back of her throat. "This would have been so much easier if you'd stayed in seclusion after your scandal as you were supposed to. Then we wouldn't have to kill you."
"You won't get away with it."
Lord Warnwick growled again. "Ah, but of course we will." Lady Wilson twitched her hand again, and Father raised the gun until it pointed at Lord Warnwick's head. "You see, no one will blame Mr. Clampton here for killing you in a duel, once rumors about how you forced his girl into servitude and did such beastly things to her. Your coalition will be tainted, and they will vote against the funding." Father cocked the gun. Any moment now, his finger would tighten on the trigger. With Lord Warnwick helpless to move and at such a short distance, Father wouldn't miss. Even if he did, Lady Wilson probably had a spare pistol sitting around for just that event. Though, she had made one mistake. She was the only one who had cast a spell on my father, so I could break it myself without Lord Warnwick's help. I was blood kin to Father, so I had a greater claim on him. It would take less magic for me to break the spell than it had taken for Lady Wilson to cast it. Still, I hadn't gotten a lot of practice breaking spells cast by others. I had learned how to break my own spells, but not like this. Father's finger was tightening on the trigger. I couldn't hesitate. Even if this backfired, at least the backlash would stop Father from taking the shot. I took my own vibrating, pulsing magic, inserted it between Father and Lady Wilson's magic, and shoved. It was a sensation like inserting a shovel into the ground, but the ground is made of lightning and pulsing and stubborn about moving. Lady Wilson frowned, and her magic tightened its grip on Father. Father swayed, his arm lowering, then raising. I shoved harder. Lady Wilson couldn't get my father. She wouldn't take him. I'd already lost the father I'd had during my younger years, the strong, courageous man who had fought wars and commanded men, who had held me and my sisters close when we were scared at night, the man who had made sure I never had any worries or cares. The war with Napoleon had stolen that man from me. Lady Wilson couldn't take what was left of him. She wasn't allowed to take advantage of what he had sacrificed for his country, and she definitely couldn't twist him into doing this crime. My magic was pulsing harder and faster than I'd ever felt before. I shoved. Lady Wilson screeched as if burned. Father dropped the gun and blinked, staring about with a deep wrinkle across his forehead. But I wasn't done yet. Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle had meddled enough. It was time to finish this. I felt for the magic holding the chain onto Lord Warnwick. As I did so, I felt his magic reaching and pulsing as well. Our magics touched, merged, and then we were working together, pushing the magic away from the chains. The chains gave. Lord Warnwick stood and shook himself, his mane puffing around his head as if a lightning storm was shooting static through him. There was still more. My magic was still pulsing and growing. I was sweating now, shaking with the force of what I had unleashed. I couldn't stop until this was over. I felt for the vibration that had surrounded Lord Warnwick from the day I'd met him. It had become such a part of him, I'd barely noticed it, even during our magic classes. But it was there, clinging to him, changing him into the form of a beast. I realized now, truly connecting to all this magic, why this spell had been so difficult to break. The spell wasn't complicated because it was well constructed. No, I had seen spells like this often in my training as my spells backfired or didn't work as they should. This spell hadn't gone as planned. I could tell that now. They'd wanted to turn him fully into a cat, but something had happened and thrown their spell off. Perhaps Lord Warnwick had fought them. Maybe they weren't skilled enough to pull off the spell they attempted. Either way, it had to be broken. Below that magic, Lord Warnwick was still there. His essence that was separate from the spell surrounding him. I latched my magic into the crack. I could feel Lord Warnwick's magic joining me, but the pulse of his was muted against the roar in my ears. I was quaking, my stomach heaving as if I was about to cast up my accounts. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't. This had to end here. I shoved, and the world exploded. I lost my grip on my magic. It shredded and pulsed outward, harder and faster than it had the first day I had attempted to use magic. I collapsed into blackness. Chapter 13. On how the matter ended. When I woke, my fingers and toes were still tingling with magic. My ears rang. My stomach still heaved. I rolled upright and coughed. There wasn't much left of the fountain, or the rose hedges. They were pulverized and collapsed, roses scattered all over the ground. Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle lay on the ground a few yards away, both apparently unconscious. Father was groaning and sitting upright as well. Where was Lord Warnwick? I staggered to my feet, searching for his tan fur. I didn't see it. I searched and spun on my heels. The rest of us had fallen where we had been standing. He couldn't be far away. There, a patch of dark green waistcoat. I stumbled toward him and collapsed next to him. He was partially buried under the remains of one of the rose hedges. His head and shoulders were completely buried, while only his breeches and boots were fully visible. I grasped the branches carefully, trying not to poke myself, and dragged them off him. When I turned back to look, I gasped and sank to my knees beside him. He was human. He had a finely chiseled jaw and a straight nose. I would have expected his hair to be a light tan, but instead it was dark brown and slightly curly. I probably wouldn't have recognized him if he hadn't been wearing the same breeches and waistcoat the beastly Lord Warnwick had been wearing before I lost control. He was handsome, even if that was hardly my primary concern at the moment. Discerning his welfare took precedence. I rested a hand on his shoulder. "Lord Warnwick, are you all right?" He didn't stir. Was he breathing? I placed my fingers in front of his nose and felt a warm puff of air. That was a good sign, at least. Why had the backlash affected him more? Perhaps because, even with the backlash, we had broken the spell? I shook him. "Lord Warnwick, please wake up." He still didn't. Just then, the constable arrived, and I did my best to explain what had happened. They took Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle into custody and helped get the still unconscious Lord Warnwick and my father back to Lord Warnwick's house. There, Mrs. Dentley fussed over Lord Warnwick, putting him to bed and instructing me to place cool cloths on his head. It took hours, but his eyes finally fluttered open nearly 3 hours after I had woken. When he blinked, I finally saw that his real eyes, his human ones, were a deep chocolate brown. Don't try to move. For some reason, the backlash affected you the most. I pushed him back down when he tried to sit up. He lifted a hand and stared, turning it slowly. I'm dreaming. No, I assure you, this is real. I placed my hands in my lap and squeezed them together to stop myself from touching his shoulder again. It wasn't at all proper. But I'm human. Yes. Somehow, we managed to toss the spell off somewhere among all the backlash. I leaned back in the chair, once again tired. I'd had a lot of magic coming through me a few hours ago, and I hadn't had time for proper rest since. He closed his eyes, breathing deep and steady for a few minutes. I remember. Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle must have cast it together. Of course. It took 2 of us to undo it. More than that, you needed a woman magiologist, since Lady Wilson was one of the casters. That's why you had been unable to undo it before. He nodded, but when he opened his eyes, they were distant, as if he were considering something. Yes, that must have been it. Mrs. Dentley patted his shoulder. You should rest, my lord. He blinked, as if he was having trouble focusing. I'll let you rest. I pushed to my feet. I couldn't explain the sense of loss I had. We'd won. Lord Warnwick was no longer a beast. He could vote in Parliament as planned. And he no longer needed me. He had his life back. Our faux courtship would end. I would go back to being merely his housekeeper. Somehow, that was no longer enough. I shut the door behind me and stumbled down the corridor, heading for the servants' stairs in the back, barely seeing my surroundings. I'd come to Lord Warnwick's country estate, planning to do nothing more than work off the debt of a few pence. But now, after everything that had happened, I couldn't return to merely working for Lord Warnwick. I reached my room in the servants' quarters. As tempting as it was to pull out my bag and begin packing right then and there, I had been up for many hours waiting for Lord Warnwick to wake, and before that, I'd made the trip from London to Portsmouth and back to London. My body ached from so much riding and the magical backlash I'd experienced. Instead of packing, I collapsed onto my bed. A few hours of sleep. Then I'd leave. When I woke, the sun slanted through the small window in the last rays of evening, far too late to start a journey. But I pulled out my bag anyway. I couldn't stay here a moment longer. My heart ached too much, my head too full with thoughts and feelings I didn't want to acknowledge. It would be best if I left as soon as possible. I dressed in the rode brocade dress and tossed the few belongings I'd arrived with into my carpet bag. I left the fancy dresses, gloves, shoes, and all the many things Lord Warnwick's generosity had paid for. I didn't feel right taking them. Besides, I would never be able to explain how they came into my possession, not without causing a scandal. I tiptoed from my room, hoping no one would notice. I'm not sure why I wanted to disappear into the night. It just seemed too painful to face everyone to say goodbye. But I should have known I could never slip from this house without notice. I'd helped staff it with people too dedicated to their jobs to allow that to happen. I barely made it halfway across the foyer before Mr. Fenton intercepted me. In the background, I spotted Mrs. Dentley scurrying off down a corridor.
Where are you off to, Miss Clampton?
Mr. Fenton stood ramrod straight, yet he'd placed himself squarely in front of the door, blocking my way. For a thin old man, he seemed surprisingly formidable just then. Back to Portsmouth, most likely. I can't stay here. I tightened my grip on my carpet bag. I could barely speak past the lump in my throat. I just can't. Footsteps pounded down the corridor a moment before Lord Warnwick burst into the foyer, his dark brown hair mussed and his cravat askew. It was still strange, seeing him as a human once again. He was even more handsome than his portrait, with gleaming dark brown hair and eyes the color of wet oak boards. He straightened his posture into something proper, clasping his hands behind his back. Surely you don't intend to leave now, Miss Clampton. It is late. It was late. scandalously late to be leaving. But at that moment, I didn't care. I held my head high with all the dignity I could muster while wearing the dreadful rose brocade dress that had started all of this. If you would be so kind as to provide a reference, I would appreciate it, sir.
Miss Clampton.
His voice rose in some strong emotion I couldn't fathom. Perhaps it was worry, but he seemed to be rather concerned over a mere servant.
You don't have to leave.
Once the termination of our courtship reaches the gossips, my reputation will be well and finally ruined. Not an unforeseen circumstance, but I cannot stay here. I needed to leave, yet even as my heart hammered with the urge to flee, I couldn't force my feet to move.
Why would our courtship have to end?
Lord Warnwick took a step closer, his hands still clasped behind his back. We accomplished our goals. Your reputation has been restored, as has your humanity. There's no reason to continue the charade. I was proud of myself that I said those words out loud, with only the hint of a waver to my voice. Inside, however, my heart broke. A charade. That's all our courtship had ever been. Yet there were the nights in his library studying magic, and the shared smiles over our battle plans, and the laughter as we practiced dancing to see which dances he could perform. Is there not? Lord Warnwick stepped closer still.
I find I have new goals, and I fear I will not accomplish them without my chief tactician to plan my battle campaigns. There is, after all, the bill I plan to introduce to Parliament regarding the care of naval veterans, especially those left disabled by the war. And Napoleon still rules most of Europe. There will be many more funding bills and parliamentary decisions to be made before we will see victory.
I shouldn't have been interested. This didn't change the fact that my heart couldn't take staying here as his housekeeper. But already I was forming ideas for which lords and ladies needed to be approached in order to secure the necessary votes to pass those measures. Parliament, after all, was really nothing more than a game of numbers. I see. You do have lofty goals. How I wanted to be a part of them. There was something so companionable about sitting across from him plotting our shared campaign on London's society. I'd never met another man who so appreciated my mathematical, magically inclined mind the way he did. Now that he was no longer a beast, there was an extra tension to our relationship, an extra level of passion that hadn't existed before. We'd become friends while plotting together, but I hadn't wanted him to lean in for a kiss the way I did now. That was why I had to leave, even if my shoes were glued to the front rug. He stepped closer still.
Ironically, we were partially right with our false story of how true love would break my curse. The spell on me couldn't be broken by just any male and female magiologist pair working together. It had to be a pair that had some bond between them. In the case of Lady Wilson and Mr. Doyle, that bond was the filial relationship between siblings.
Lord Warnwick gently cupped my chin, tipping my face up.
Please tell me our bond is deeper than mere friendship.
I can't. I pulled away. Why was I pulling away? Everything in me tore in two directions. I couldn't think past my pounding heart. I have no connections. My family is near ruin. I'm your housekeeper.
And I spent the past 8 months as a beast. What of it?
Lord Warnwick flapped his hand as if to dismiss my objections.
I have weathered far worse scandal than marrying below my station. I have money and connections enough. What I don't have is a wife. And I can't think of anyone who can be my partner in my magical pursuits and political goals as well as you can.
That might not sound like the most romantic of proposals, but I knew how we worked. We were mathematics and magical theories. Love for us was an equation that said we would be happier and more blessed together, sharing in each other's goals and trials and lives. He loved me for whom I was, and I loved him as he was. I knew, honorable man that he was, that he would aid with my father's care and see to it that my sisters were probably debuted and settled. In that moment, my heart and my feet and my head all came to an agreement. I stepped toward him, the direction I needed to go, not out the door, not home to Portsmouth. But to him. I wonder how much study has been given to the magical effects of a married couple working together. Love must add something to the enchantment. I was daringly close to him now. The lack of female magiologists would have curtailed that line of study severely. Perhaps we can be an inspiration to them. Lord Warnwick, my Lord Warnwick, leaned down and gently pressed a kiss to my lips. Utterly scandalous, as I was standing there unchaperoned in his home, after all. Though my father was around here somewhere, probably talking about past naval engagements with Mr. Felton. Lord Warnwick pulled back, keeping the kiss short and gentlemanly. He glanced down and grimaced. That rose fabric truly is horrid. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Who knew I could find a love like this, all because of some torn, ugly curtains? I hope you enjoyed listening to Torn Curtains, Part 3 by Tara Grayce, narrated by Karyne Norton. If you want to read more by Tara, go to taragrayce.com, where you can find her Elven Alliance series, which are full of elves. And for the record, I'm saying series plural because she has 2 that are 70 years apart and a 3rd that she's going to start releasing this year. You can also check out her Court of Midsummer Mayhem and the connecting standalones that all have Fae. And you can grab one of those standalones and prequels for free when you sign up for her newsletter. So don't forget to do that while you're there. And then head on over to findingfantasyreads.com/giveaway to enter this month's giveaway before it's done. If you win, you'll get 3 of the books in Tara's Elven Alliance series, plus several others and a 3-month Audible membership. If you're interested in making a financial donation to the podcast to help it keep running, go to findingfantasyreads.com/donate. All donations go directly towards podcast expenses like hosting fees, editing services, and advertising, allowing us to record more fantastic stories for you. As always, I will have links for all those sites in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.